Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
A clear global problem. The absolute consensus is that human action is leading to an increase in average temperatures. Absolute consensus. I know you may try to argue with that, but you can't.
No, not my
But therefore, but the key point is, can we respond to it? Do we have the political institutions and the political will and the organisation globally to respond to this challenge? And that worries me immensely. I don't think we do at the moment.
And I'm absolutely stunned that someone who is inspired by Richard Feynman, a fantastic scientist who believes in empirical evidence, is quoting a consensus.
Can I just say, I brought the graph, right? I mean, can I just...
First of all, that the data has been corrupted, and we know that the 1930s were warmer than today.
Yeah. Corrupted, what do you mean corrupted?
Been manipulated.
By
NASA? By the
NASA?
yes. As far as I'm concerned, politics should be based on empirical evidence. All policy should be based on empirical evidence. I've heard consensus, which is not science. I've heard appeals to authority, which is not science. I've heard various illusions.
Hang on.
I've heard... Hang on. Hang on.
Killing the Left's Climate Catastrophe Movement. That's the title of today's show here on Truth Thursday on the Rob Maness Show live on Patriot.tv and X Spaces simulcast. Well, the attempted prescriptions for climate change are generally worse than the disease, especially for the poor. Demands to transform our global energy infrastructure to depend heavily on wind, solar, and other renewables really are harmful to people in America and the world, especially the poor. And meanwhile, continued large-scale use of traditional energy sources like nuclear, hydro, and fossil fuels would reduce poverty while doing less harm to the environment. All those words are from the new book, Climate and Energy, The Case for Realism, which combines outstanding climate science, physics, economics, environmental science, political science, ethics, and theology to present a well-reasoned understanding of human-induced climate change and how to respond to it. My guest today is the author, Dr. Carl Beisner, is the founder and president of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, a network of Christian theologians, natural scientists, economists, and other scholars. Dr. Beisner was associate professor for over a decade. He's written over 15 books, published thousands of articles, and testified on the ethics and economics of climate change before both the U.S. Senate and the House. He's also briefed the White House Council on Environmental Policy and is a sought-after speaker at climate conferences worldwide. Dr. Beisner, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Colonel Maness, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you, and thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you, and thank you for what you do, because you're providing a service to our country too by taking on topics like climate science. And the first clip that I showed there as the intro is really my first question. Is look, I'm a data-driven person. I flew for 25 years. All of my fields have been based on science, hard science, physics, math, those kinds of sciences. And I know that consensus in the word science is not really science. I mean, you can't develop a hypothesis and then go out and adequately explore it by using words like consensus and science together. it's antithetical
Absolutely.
to what real science is. Why are people accepting that is my first question to you. Can you inform us as to why it is? I have to chuckle because it makes me chuckle every time I think about some of this craziness that we see.
Well, we might start out with thank you, American public schooling, because frankly, our public schools are no longer teaching what real science is. And so many of them have completely collapsed to confusing consensus among scientists with good science. I found it really ironic that the one real catastrophist about climate change on that clip started off by referring to Richard Feynman. Now, Feynman, of course, was the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And there's a very famous clip of his on YouTube about what he calls the key to science. And what Feynman says in that clip is that the way science works is we make a guess as to how something in the natural world works. Then we make predictions about what we ought to see in the natural world if our guess is correct. Then we make observations. And if the observations contradict our predictions, then our guess was wrong, period. Doesn't make any difference how smart you are or how beautiful your guess was, your hypothesis. Doesn't matter how many people agree with you. If the observations contradict the predictions, then your guess is wrong. Well, all of the fears of catastrophic anthropogenic, that is man-made, global warming, rest on projections of future temperature made by computerized climate models. And here's the fact about the observations versus the predictions. The models, on average, exaggerate the amount of warming observed over the relevant period of time by at least double, and in many cases, 3, 4, or 5 times. And what that means is that the guesses that drove the predictions of the models are wrong, and that the climate system does not work the way the catastrophists think it does. So, I mean, there's the beginning. We have to go back to real science, as you suggested, where empirical evidence rather than models drives our conclusions. The models we know are wrong. They therefore provide no rational basis for any predictions about future temperature, and therefore also no rational basis for any kind of policy. And we have to go back to empirical observation. And as we show in our book, Climate and Energy, the Case for Realism, the best empirical evidence says that while, yes, carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we emit through our industrial activities probably do make the world a little bit warmer than it otherwise would be, the amount of warming that we get from those is very small and is not dangerous. The benefits of that warming probably outweigh the risks. And the benefits of the energy that we get from coal, oil, and natural gas, the main sources of carbon dioxide, far outweigh any risks from any kind of climate-related disaster, which is part of why, over the last 100 years, human mortality, average number of deaths per year due to extreme weather events, has fallen by more than 98%. And then besides that, the added CO2 in the atmosphere makes all the plants grow better, which makes everything better for anything that eats plants. And of course, the world's poor benefit the most.
Oh, absolutely. It's very interesting that we find ourselves at this point. But there were two things that stood out to me when I reviewed your materials about that, and unfortunately, I agree with everything you just said, which makes me a little biased. But I want to ask hard questions about the data and the guesses being wrong. How was that data corrupted? Does that corruption generate from the guesses being wrong, or does it generate somewhere else, like the individual
Yeah.
in our opening clip there talked about NASA being
Yeah.
involved in it, in
Yeah.
that corruption? How does that work, real quick, before we dive into some of the others?
Well, we first have to distinguish carefully between data and computer model projections or predictions or scenarios, right? Computer model output is not data, all right? Data is what we actually observe when we, read a thermometer, when we measure the thickness of an ice flow or something like that. That's data. Computer model output is not data. Then, so the next question is, all right, what is happening with data? Well, frankly, for the most important, certainly the most widely used measure of so-called anthropogenic climate change, which is so-called global average temperature. And there are even problems with that very idea itself, but we won't go there right now, a little too technical. Most of the data have been derived for a century plus a little bit from thermometers on land, later on sometimes on airplanes or on ships and whatnot. But those thermometers are not all of the same type. They're not all read by the same person. They're not all in the same circumstances, and they were by no means covering the entire planet. The only period for which we have really good data on temperatures all over the world, 24/7, 365, year after year, from comparable instruments being read by the same processes, are satellite data, data from our satellites. Those only reach back to 1979. Now, what those tell us, what the observations tell us, is that the average rate of increase of global average temperature from 1979 to now is about 0.14 degrees Celsius per year. Per decade. That would be 1.4 degrees per century. That's not actually all that terribly fast. It's certainly not historically unprecedented. We probably exceeded that going into the medieval warm period back in the 900s. We exceeded that as a decline rate going into the Little Ice Age in the 1300s to 1800s. So the actual data don't tell us anything frightening. But if you're part of a movement that wants to, how shall I put this, use fears of catastrophic global warming to get people to embrace policies that would move control of our lives from more local to less local, from national to global, and that would persuade us to choose less prosperous lifestyles. If you have that notion, then you want people to think that the warming is much faster and that it's unprecedented in the past. So what you do is, instead of depending on the satellite data, you depend on the ground-based data from around the world. And unfortunately, those are highly mixed, they're unrepresentative, and they are extremely polluted, I might say. We don't have to say corrupted, because that assumes dishonesty. And hey, there's plenty of dishonesty, but not yet. Let's not go there quite yet. Those are heavily affected by what's called urban heat island effect. Urban areas absorb more heat from the sun, and then they hold it for a while. And consequently, the air around them is warmer than the air in rural areas that surrounds them. And as a result of very, very careful comparison of urban readings with suburban and rural readings, we now have a pretty solid understanding that the urban readings raise the apparent, not real, global average temperature by about 40 to 50% more than we ought to be reporting. And we get that when we compare the land-based measurements or the sea surface-based measurements with the satellite measurements.
Wow. I mean, that's why I asked that question, because folks just wave top this information as it comes in. We get so much information today, and even those of us that had a good public school education that taught us what science is and hypotheses and how you explore them and those kind of things have a
I
lot of
can go into
information.
the corruption issue too, by the way. I can go into the corruption issue for you a little bit if you want.
Well, after the break, we'll go into that, and I want to talk about the harm to the poor, because one of the reasons that I served and got into public service after my military service is concern for the poor in this nation, and that we ought to be able to do things better and set policies that enable them to become prosperous instead of remaining poor or getting poorer. And apparently, this climate catastrophe movement hurts the poor more than it almost does anything else. I'm Rob Maness, talking with Dr. Cal Beisner, and we will be right back on Patriot.tv.
We've learned through the pandemic we can never be caught unprepared again. And so many Americans, when COVID hit, they had nothing in the house. Stores were shut down and doctors' offices were shut down. And even if doctors prescribed drugs, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, pharmacists wouldn't fill the prescriptions. That was a nightmare.
Now the situation is much worse. We have these horrible supply chain problems. In our emergency medical kit at the Wellness Company, we have 8 prescription drugs that are all potentially life-saving.
Most people who died with COVID, they died in the hospital because they didn't receive early treatment.
Every American family should have one of these.
I can tell you the Wellness Company kit is the answer.
Experts say that Russian hackers found a way to hack our utilities, and the hackers may still be in there, waiting to strike.
Go after their power, go after their water, and you can bring a nation to its knees.
They're identifying targets, they're positioning malware so they could pull the trigger when they wanted to.
Experts see the intrusion as a possible precursor to an unprecedented Russian cyber attack that could, in the event of war, devastate the U.S.
We know that China has been hacking everything they can and stealing our intellectual property. They want to take down America's economy. They want to take down our morale. They understand that if they can destroy our economy, they can destroy our future. We're at war.
Now to a landmark climate change lawsuit. A group of young people successfully sued the government in Montana for failing to protect them from climate change. Devin Dwyer is in Washington with those details for us. Good morning, Devin.
Hey, good morning, Robin. This is the first time a U.S. court has ruled that the government violated the rights of children by failing to protect them from climate change. This was a case brought by kids ages 5 to 22. They testified in court about the impacts of wildfires, drought, and floods near their homes. The judge in the case said scientific evidence clearly links those events to fossil fuels being promoted by the state. And she declared that the state's constitution guarantees a right to a clean and healthful environment, which includes the climate. The decision now means that officials will be required to consider greenhouse gas emissions when they consider new oil and gas projects in the state of Montana. The state says it will appeal this decision, but it is inspiring this morning groups of young people in a number of other states to sue their governments to do more about climate change. Michael?
Hi, Devin Dwyer. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show live on Patriot.tv, and that's our show today. I mean, all wrapped up in one clip there, where you take the bad public education, bad science, and bad government and combine it all in one short 1-minute clip, and you can see what a disaster can occur when we have the wrong information, and so many people have it, that they're acting on it because they believe it. And we're talking with Dr. Cal Beisner today, the author of Climate and Energy, The Case for Realism, a new book that's just about to come out. And we're excited to have scientists that actually are courageous enough to document the truth and advocate for good policy. Well, Dr. Beisner, the poverty issue, I think, is something that we should all be concerned about when we're talking about renewables like wind and solar. They do a couple of things that result in the poor people getting poorer. One, it makes energy more expensive because it's so expensive to make it, and it hurts our environment. Those two types of renewables themselves, in my mind, hurt the environment and hurt our population, and it makes no common sense that we would continue to drive down these paths. What do you talk about those and how it does create more poverty when we rely solely on those types of energy?
Yeah, I am glad to do that. Rob, in my childhood, I lived in Calcutta, India, when my dad was with the State Department. And I observed poverty at a level that most Americans cannot really imagine. For a while, my mother was very, very ill, and for several months, every day, I had to be walked by the hand by an Indian woman to the home of another Indian family where I would spend the day. We went out early in the morning, and because we did that, all along the way, I was stepping over the bodies of people who had died overnight of starvation and disease. That's what real poverty is about. It's something way beyond anything that anyone in America has ever experienced. And that's what motivates me to be involved in this battle. I am not myself a scientist, though I've read over 60 books and thousands of articles on climate science and climate change science and the like. And I think I know this pretty well. I've done a lot more work in it than I did for my earned PhD from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. But this book is not just by me. I'm the co-editor of it with Dr. David Legates, who is a retired climatology professor and used to be with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And we have a large number of authors contributing to this: climate scientists, engineers, energy producers, and economists and the like. One of them is Vijay Jayaraj. He's an Indian climate scientist who's also an energy management specialist. And in his chapter, Climate and Energy Policy in the Developing World, Vijay, who is a good friend of mine, explains exactly how the policies meant to fight global warming will actually harm the world's poor, including those in America, but especially those in developing countries. Here in America, we think of people as poor who in fact are rich beyond the dreams of avarice for the vast majority of mankind through all human history. In India, in China, in sub-Saharan Africa, in parts of Southeast Asia and Latin America, poverty means something very different. Roughly 2 billion people in the world have zero electricity ever, period. Now think about that. No lights, no washing machine, no dryer, no refrigerator, no computer, no nothing, no electricity whatsoever. And yet, access to electricity, affordable electricity, is crucial to human health. It's crucial to human prosperity. And what we're being asked to do to slow or stop global warming, even though in fact it's not a serious threat, what we're being asked to do is to substitute very diffuse, low density, unreliable, expensive energy sources, primarily wind and solar, for abundant, affordable, reliable, scalable energy coming primarily from coal, natural gas for electricity, oil for transport fuels, nuclear for electricity, hydro from dams and whatnot for electricity. These are much more affordable, they're much more abundant, and they're much more reliable. The wind, of course, doesn't always blow. The sun doesn't always shine. When it's not windy, when it's not shiny, we don't get energy from wind and solar. And consequently, we have to back them up either with more energy generated from coal or natural gas for our electric grids, or with batteries. But in the latter case, we're spending even more money. And so the results are that we make energy far less affordable to people all over the world, including in America. Why is that important? Because as we learned way back, maybe in middle school, energy is the capacity to do work. And work is what we have to do to get food, clothing, shelter, everything else that we depend on. The more energy you can apply, the more work you can do, therefore the more of all those things that make us healthy and long-lived we can have. So this is why I'm against this.
Sometimes you think that I think that they want us to all go back and live in caves and go completely regressed back to those times instead of continue to progress to eliminate poverty around the world, including in America, and make energy so affordable and abundant and reliable, which is the watchword, Doc, of the utility industry. I worked in the utility industry for a few years after I left the Air Force, and reliability and scalability are the two key factors that we should judge our energy sources on. And these renewables meet neither one of those. Well, we've got a live audience, and I do take questions, Dr. Beisner. So I've got a hand up over there. Let me take a question for you from the audience before we go to the second break. Go ahead. Kat and Shell are our hosts in these spaces. Go ahead, Kat.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, I look forward to seeing your book. I'm a professional in the energy industry, electric system planner, and I absolutely am concerned that the transformation process is blind, uninformed, and will lead to some outages during the worst time of the year, mainly winter. And so I've studied this over and over, and I'm a very active voice in pushing for more active measures to look at this. The question I had on your data from the satellites, does that isolate the CO2 impact compared to the solar variations? Because I've heard that's a pretty significant piece to make sure is accurately represented, as opposed to pointing CO2 as the demon of all of the total cause of warming for whatever alarmism. And then the other thing is what information can be out there document wise to try to counter this narrative, because it's very destructive, as you're well aware of where we're headed as a country.
Great question. Yeah. First, since you are in the electric industry, I would invite you to get involved in the Cornwall Alliance. Visit our website, cornwallalliance.org. Write us a note, and I'd welcome your becoming involved in what we do. Our aim is to educate the public and policymakers on biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the poor, and the gospel of Christ. And very crucial to the economic development for the poor is the electric industry and energy and everything related to that. Now, you asked whether the satellite data distinguishes between CO2's contribution to warming versus changes in solar energy output or ocean cycles of ocean currents. The satellite data is solely about temperature, right? And the temperature is the same no matter what causes warming or cooling, right? So that's a distinct question. But in our book, we do have several different chapters on the role of the sun, the role of clouds, the role of the oceans, and so on, that discuss the different contributors to the changes in global average temperature. And basically what I would summarize the findings, and this is from empirical observation, not just computer modeling. The way I'd summarize the findings is that, yeah, as we add carbon dioxide or methane or nitrous oxide to the atmosphere, those do contribute some to making the world warm. They make it a bit warmer than it otherwise would be, other things being equal. But they're bit players by comparison with cycles in solar energy output, solar magnetic wind output, cloudiness, ocean cycle current cycles like the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, the Atlantic Decadal Oscillation, the Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation, several others, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. These all are much more important to determining global average temperature than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide probably, that is CO2 from human sources, probably contributes less than 2% of the change in global temperature that we've observed over the last 150 years or so. That means that they contribute less than 2% of about 1.1 degrees Celsius. Certainly not something to worry about.
Sure isn't. When we come back from the next break, Dr. Beister, I want to talk about how this electric vehicle issue is harming our societies already because it's being forced on a market when the market share is not there, for one, and its production, especially of the batteries, is just very destructive to a lot of things, including our environment. I'm Rob Maness, talking with Dr. Cal Beisner here on the Rob Maness Show live at Patriot.tv. We'll be right back.
Hi neighbor, Pat Boone here. Today, I want to help you find some peace of mind concerning your money. Like it or not, we're all living in a financial war zone. That's right. We're watching our hard-earned dollars get crushed by inflation. In fact, recently inflation reached its highest level in 40 years. And on top of that, cash, which has always represented freedom and privacy, is more and more being replaced by a cashless system. That's right. Powerful forces are definitely waging a war against cash. So I'm encouraging you to prepare before it's too late. Call or text the number on the screen for a free report, The Secret War on Cash from Swiss America. Discover how a few simple steps can protect your money as well as your privacy and your peace of mind. So call or text for your free report, The Secret War on Cash, and make sure to mention Pat Boone sent you.
Sounds rolling, all three cameras, we're good.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor Lieutenant General Michael Flynn pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
Really brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive?
Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Environmental Protection Agency will hold a hearing on California's EV mandate. That mandate basically bans the sale of new gas cars by 2035. Climate guy Mark Morano is with us this morning. Mark, a contrarian question. We hear that last year, 2023, was the hottest year ever on record. So what's wrong with banning gas-powered cars by 2035?
Well, first of all, if you want to get the hottest year on record is pretty much declared almost every year, every other year. It's based on hundredths or tenths of a degree difference, many times within the margin of error of the data set. And even the NASA former head global warming scientist said it's a political statement. It's meant to create fear, meant to push politics like an EV ban. And if you were actually worried about climate change, the last thing you would think of is EVs are the solution. It takes 500,000 pounds of materials, including raw earth materials, to make one average-sized Tesla battery. EVs dig the earth, and not in a groovy 1970s Brady Bunch way, Stewart, but I mean they dig the earth deeply with emissions, with environmental standards, and we're farmed all of that out to the countries with the worst human rights and environmental standards. China, and of course Chinese-owned factories in Africa with underage kids. So even if you're concerned about global warming, EVs aren't the answer.
But if they accept California's mandate, that rapidly becomes a national mandate, doesn't it? It'll be adopted by all the other states, almost inevitably. That would mean this country will ban gas cars by 2035. I mean, do you really see that happening?
Well, I see a major collision coming and a battle. Here, I worked when I was in the United States Senate Environment Public Works Committee as a staffer, not a senator. We dealt with this California waiver. The Trump administration dealt with this. It's back again. What this basically says is California is going to be granted the right to set federal vehicle transportation policy. That's
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show live on Patriot.tv and X-Spaces simulcast. We're talking with Dr. Cal Beisner today about his and his co-author's new book that's addressing issues like the science and what is right about it and what is wrong about it and policy. And that little clip there, Dr. Beisner, is focused on the policy issue of electric vehicles, specifically electric vehicle batteries, and that California is about to make a policy that will affect the entire United States. There's a whole host of reasons that I'm opposed to it: economically, environmentally. It affects the poor again. When a president of the United States, like the one we have today, who's going to give his State of the Union speech tonight, I'm sure he's going to brag about this, is trying to force automakers to make electric vehicles without even having a market share, and the things are rotting on car lots right now, and the American people aren't buying it because they see the fallacy and, quite frankly, the lunacy of a policy like this at this point in time. And I don't think that ever with electric vehicle battery technology will be to the point where it's not lunacy to force that on the entire population of not just America, but the entire globe.
Yeah, that's right. You know, there are some ways in which electric vehicles are technologically really wonderful things. You know, I mean, if you've ever been in one and felt the surge, you know, I mean, that's pretty amazing. But the problem is that the best technological thing is not necessarily the best thing for your neighbor and my neighbor or society at large. This is why the vast majority of the people in the world do not drive high-end BMWs and Mercedes-Benz and Lamborghinis and things like that. They're outstanding vehicles, but they're way too expensive for ordinary people like me or my neighbors to drive. Well, electric vehicles are similar to that. A lot of their expense is hidden by the fact that there are so many different federal and often state subsidies and tax credits that mask how expensive they are. As it is, on average, they run about 30 to 40% more in cost than a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle. But if we were to add into them the socialized cost, that is the cost borne by tax subsidies and tax credits and subsidies, then instead they'd be closer to double the typical cost of a comparable vehicle. But then beyond that, there's this problem as well, that a recent study from the Texas Public Policy Foundation found that if you count all the different subsidies, tax credits, not just for the building and marketing of the electric vehicles, but for all the steps along the way, making the batteries, doing the mining for the minerals for the batteries and so on, it turns out that the cost of operating an electric vehicle in terms of fuel per mile is, or cost per mile of fuel, all right, is about equivalent to gasoline running $17 a gallon. Now, the electric vehicle owner doesn't pay that. because all of that cost has been borne already, pushed off on taxpayers all over America and some other places. But that's the actual result. Now, what we have to recognize from that is that the more you pay to drive down the road, the less you have available to pay for medical care or education or a vacation travel or something like that. So electric vehicles are hideously expensive. And then besides that, there's the issue, and my good friend Mark Morano in that clip that you played made this point. We're having to move vast amounts of earth to get the minerals that go into EV batteries. And those minerals, especially lithium and cobalt, are coming from places where mining industries are not well regulated. It's very unsafe. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is not democratic and not a republic, where most of our cobalt comes from, a lot of that mining is done by children at the point of a gun. This is dreadful. And in China, a lot of it is done, and the refining of these chemicals is done by Uyghur slave labor. This is just unconscionable. And this is why, of course, I join Mark Morano in opposing this kind of policy. And by the way, I'm quite sure it's going to collapse. You know, eventually reality bites. You know, so we're not going to see this go too much farther, I think.
That's right. That's right. I completely agree with you. Well, we've got a hand up over in the audience. Let's go ahead and take that question real quick before we go to our last break. Michelle.
Go ahead, Bishop.
I wanted to step back. I'm kind of confused. When did we change the language? Because when I was growing up, we used carbon monoxide. That would be a fossil fuel connection. Mm-hmm. And now, what agency changed it to CO2, which I thought that's what plants grew off of. And yes, that's what we expel. So I'm thinking, are they, I'm seeing trees and death to humans with that word.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to
what
doctor.
You're seeing here is the result of an environmentalist worldview that basically is anti-human and wants to reduce total human population and to reduce our standard of living back to something like maybe just subsistence agriculture rather than an industrial society. Now, the switch from carbon monoxide, which is a fatally toxic gas, right, which is why you don't want to run your car in your garage with the door closed and stand in there, right? To carbon dioxide, well, it's a different issue. Carbon dioxide is not being called a pollutant because somebody thinks it's poisonous. It's not. As a matter of fact, when you exhale, you're exhaling 40,000 parts per million carbon dioxide, and the air around you is only about 420 parts per million. But instead, the objection is that carbon dioxide contributes to global warming. And that warming is thought to be dangerous to catastrophic. We talked earlier in the show about the fact that it isn't. But CO2 does, in fact, contribute some to global warming, so that's the excuse for opposing it. But I think the real excuse is not so much the worry about warming as what you hit on the head. You hit the nail on the head when you referred to those who basically don't like human beings, and they would like to see far fewer of us. In fact, the top, the heads of the world's largest environmental activist organizations generally agree that optimal human population for the world would be about 500 million, 500 million. In other words, we have to get rid of about the 95% of us. That's a good explanation for the whole climate catastrophe movement.
Yeah, and as part of the movement, the pushback against that, I mean, we're constantly telling the truth, which is our birth rates are too low right now.
Yes.
Elon Musk talks about it all the time. Folks like you and your colleagues talk about it. Common sense people, I consider myself in that crowd. We talk about it. We see it. And quite honestly, common sense would tell us that the reason why the border invasion is being not only allowed, but actually accomplished intentionally is because even the Democrats, like Joe Biden, talk about it. And he's probably going to brag about that too tonight. Well, we've got to take our second break, Dr. Beisner. When we come back, though, I want to talk about two things. One is, why is nuclear technology better, and how do we get there to where we can actually build new nuclear technology reactors? And then two, the biblical worldview of stewardship of the environment and how that fits into your book. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show on Patriot.tv.
The markets are getting crazy, and now is the time to protect yourself from economic turmoil. Silver is in the headlines right now and creating lots of excitement as the price of silver is extremely attractive compared to gold. A call to Swiss America gets you the scoop on whether the silver opportunity is for real. What you'll discover will really blow your mind. Today, silver faces a huge shortage due to the rising demand by military, solar, electric cars, and computers, all of which depend on silver. But right now, silver is priced to sell according to worldwide experts. Now, to help you get started, Swiss America is offering beautiful United States Walking Liberty half dollars, issued by the U.S. Mint from 1916 to 1947 and minted in 90% pure silver for a special introductory price. Limit of $250 per customer while supplies last. So call the number on your screen or visit SwissAmerica.com, because now is the time to rediscover silver.
Joining me at the news desk now is Rebecca Walzer of WalzerWealth.com. She has been a regular guest on my TV show, Brennan House Live, for a long time. She's not just an economics expert, but she's an attorney. Rebecca, you have a large firm. How many people work for your firm?
Just about 30, yes.
30. And
yes.
Tell me, how can people prepare for what's coming with the end of the dollar as we know it?
The end of the fiat system as we know it globally. We are moving to hard asset-backed currencies again. Thank the Lord, because fiat is where we get into all the problems. When you have debt-based currency, you have debt-based problems. And the United States, unfortunately, since 2020 has not stopped spending at pandemic levels. This is systemic, and it is unsustainable, and it is coming to an end, especially with the addition of Saudi Arabia and the UAE to the BRICS nations. This is what controls our petrodollar. This is the threat immediately in 2024.
For more information, WalzerWealth.com. WalzerWealth.com. She is not your traditional financial planner. Find out why at WalzerWealth.com.
The goal here is to provide energy as cheaply, as efficiently, and critically as environmentally non-destructively as possible, right? And what we have is a trajectory of renewable energy development that is absolutely rocketing ahead. In the 20 or so years it's going to take to build a nuclear energy grid or infrastructure that actually helps it to feed into and solve some of the problems we have, we're going to see an exponential difference in the amount of available energy from other processes. So should we not be spending most of our time accelerating that development process rather than developing nuclear plants that will take a long time to come online?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with renewables is that they're reaching their limits in many countries. So you know that we're trying to bring the solar panel production back from China because it's being made in quasi-slave labor conditions in China and Xinjiang province. New York Times, the State Department, the German Bundestag, they've all reviewed the evidence, and they believe that it's forced labor making solar panels in China. As they come back to the United States, the prices are going to be a lot higher. With the industrial wind turbines, the big growth opportunity is on the offshore, off the East Coast. But there's now research showing that it's actually driving the increase of whale deaths. Our organization has a report and a documentary film coming out that shows that the high decibel pile driving and the increased boat traffic is responsible for the increase in whaling deaths. So we could see a real, and then meanwhile, the wind industry has been having financial problems, as you know, because of rising costs. And so when you add all that to an increasingly unreliable grid, made unreliable by all of these unreliable energy sources, it really underscores the need for reliable sources of power. And that's the only nuclear can deliver that.
Can I just ask you, Michael, because obviously I'm not going to try and make the debate about renewables and the other forms of energy. If we're talking strictly nuclear, why would any government, any major enterprise right now try to invest the raft of capex that it would take in order to really push nuclear in multiple jurisdictions when we're potentially very close to fusion as well? Do you think that, spending money now that in 5 years we could see some advancement, hopefully, it's worth really trying to invest big now?
Well, the question is really, why are France, Japan, and South Korea investing in nuclear? And the reason is the same everywhere. It's the only cheap and reliable way to produce zero carbon power in a scalable way. Hydroelectric.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show live on Patriot.tv, and we're talking about that subject. How do we produce clean and reliable and scalable energy in the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly, and prosperity-friendly way? And one of those ways is nuclear power. Well, there's some great new technologies for reactor use that are out there that all we have to do is do away with all these bad regulations that prevent us from doing it and build power plants using these new reactor technologies that are safer, they're cleaner. The spent fuel can be reused as fuel for reactors again, instead of what it was like with the older style reactor technology. And we're talking with Dr. Cal Beisner, co-author of a new book that's out about this issue and really ending the climate catastrophe movement and starting to focus on what real policy that it works for good to provide us that safe, reliable, scalable energy that we need going into the future of the 21st century and beyond. Well, Dr. Beisner, that clip focused on nuclear energy, and I wanted to get a little focus on that and get the author's takes on that issue, because I've been talking about it since before I left the Air Force, trying to get small modular reactors built on the national security side, which is a project I was working on as a base commander before I left the military in 2011. But we don't seem to be able to get anywhere with that. And that really is, that was Michael Schellenberger. He used to be anti-nuclear power, and he's an environmentalist. So what are y'all's take on that?
Well, one of the most alarmist environmentalists about climate change is Dr. James Hansen, former head of the a space science center of NASA, and he's famous for having said that global warming was just going to be disastrous, that it was going to raise sea levels by 20, 40, 60 feet or more within this century and so on. He was totally wrong about those things. But even Jim Hansen has now said that anybody who claims to be concerned about climate change and who doesn't support nuclear power just isn't serious, isn't even sincere. And I think he's absolutely right there. Nuclear can be, if we can get rid of some of the overregulation of it that is based on completely bogus fears about dangers from nuclear energy. If we can get rid of some of those, we can make nuclear energy far less expensive as a source for electricity than even coal or natural gas, and far more reliable than both of those. This really is the fuel of the future, is nuclear. Small modular reactors, SMRs, are a tremendous opportunity. And frankly, the US Navy has been doing this for 60 years plus, building nuclear reactors small enough to go inside a ship, and they operate safely year after year after year. If we even just duplicated those on land, we could hugely reduce electricity prices for Americans all over this country, and at the same time, improve electricity reliability. So supporting nuclear is a very important thing. It's one of the purposes that we have in publishing our book, Climate and Energy, The Case for Realism. And if I may, I'll also mention, Rob, that during the month of April, the Cornwall Alliance, which is a nonprofit 501c3 think tank organization, We will, as our way of saying thank you, when people make a donation to us of literally any size and request it, we will send a free copy of this almost 500-page long, highly scholarly and yet written for lay people to understand book. All they need to do is to go to cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. Click on the donate button. And as they fill out their donation form, just ask for climate and energy. And we'll be glad to send them a copy as our way of saying thank you.
Outstanding. Well, we've got one more hand up in the audience. We'll take it before we close out the show, sir. But so, Kat, go ahead. I see your hand up there. What's your question for Dr. Beisner?
I'll try to be really quick. So as a conservative, I constantly get accused of being part of a cult. But don't you think a lot of the movement, I mean, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but it sure seems to me that a lot of the people that are caught up in this, what I consider the climate hoax, the climate change stuff, are almost cultish about it, because I've done many, many posts where I've researched the whole thing, like you just spoke about the way EV batteries are made and how they are absolutely destructive to the environment. And they literally will just go, well, that's not true. Any advice on how to deal with that mentality? Because I literally think they have become cultists. No matter what evidence you show them, they will not change their mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I would do first is just to refer you to a fascinating book called The Grip of Culture. The Grip of Culture. This is published by the Global Warming Policy Foundation in Great Britain. It is available through Amazon. And in fact, it's even available in PDF free on the Global Warming Policy Foundation's website, if you just look that up. But this book makes a very strong case from a whole bunch of different public polling data that the degree to which people buy into the notion of catastrophic man-made global warming is determined almost entirely by their religious perspectives, not at all by scientific understanding, not even so much by political party affiliation or anything else like that. It's a fascinating book, and so I would recommend that to you. Yeah, a lot of the environmentalist movement is highly religious. It is definitely not Christian. It is definitely not based on a biblical understanding of human beings made in God's image, sacred and with dignity. We recognize that what God calls us to do is to enhance the fruitfulness, the beauty, and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and the benefit of our neighbors, so that we're really addressing the two great commandments, to love God and to love neighbor. And that's what Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation is all about.
Yeah, and a realism approach to any policy is a good thing. Quite honestly, ideological or idealistic approaches, just look at what's going on with our foreign policy in the United States and national security. That's been infected and infested by idealism instead of realism. So I appreciate you coming on today, Dr. Beisner, and the book. Tell us about the book, when it's going to come out, where folks can find it real quick, and where folks can find you on social media before we let you go.
Right. Again, we're at cornwallalliance.org. The book is Climate and Energy, The Case for Realism, co-edited by myself and Dr. David R. Legates. We have a bunch of other authors, climate scientists, economists, engineers, energy experts, ethicists. It's a great book. It can be ordered in advance on Amazon, but frankly, as I said before, as our way of saying thanks, if people make a donation to the Cornwall Alliance of any size and request it, we'd be glad to send a free copy of this book, and 100% of the donation will be tax deductible.
Well, thank you, Dr. Beisner, and God bless you guys, and God bless your work. The Cornwall Alliance, folks, go there, check it out, make a donation, and get a copy of the book. Well, next week, we got a big one coming on Monday. It's More War Monday. We haven't done an update on the Israel-Hamas war in a while. So Colonel Kurt Schlichter, U.S. Army retired, currently an attorney and an author, will be here with us to talk about the crazy extremists, both inside our country and over in Gaza and in the Middle East, that support the atrocities against Jewish civilians, women, and babies even that happened on October 7th. So I'll see you next week on More War Monday. I'm Rob Maness, live on Patriot.tv.
My story started with alcohol, and I had tried going to other treatments, and all I did was think about how I was not going to drink or how I was going to drink one more day and then stop the next day. And Katie had found a treatment. I thought it was kind of hokey.
I could see a couple days into it, it's like the light bulb went on with him.
It's an IV infusion of all natural NAD. It saved my life and my family.
We've been where you sit.
The hardest part of this is making that phone call and just come in and talk to us.